Welcome back everyone to another episode of Video Game Pickups. I'm really excited about this episode because I get to talk about actually going out to hunt for video games. Yesterday I went to the Retro Valley video game swap, and hosted by Game Realms in Burbank. It's such an awesome place, and I started off the day by going to Game Tower in Saugus. And they have really cool, awesome collectibles. They have on-the-card action figures, Star Wars, Pokemon, a lot of McDonald's and Burger King toys that they would give off back in the 90s, mid-2000s. Really cool stuff, and they've got a really nice selection of retro video games, Super Nintendo all the way through PS4. They have several locations, but the one that's closest to me is the one in Saugus, and they have another one over in Northridge, I believe, and then Los Angeles. They're really cool, and I highly recommend if you're in those areas to check out Game Tower. But the main reason for the day was because yesterday, Game Realms in Burbank was holding the Retro Valley Game Swap, which it's several game collectors, dealers, and also established retro stores set up to kind of sell some of the things that they're able to get their hands on, and so that collectors like myself and other people who are looking for specific games can show up, kind of like a mini expo, and it's really awesome. And because I haven't been out collecting in a while and actually physically going out to retro stores to hunt for games, this was such a breath of fresh air to actually be amongst people who have the same interests and passion as I was, and it was really awesome. And this is the second one that I've been to. I think they may have held a couple prior to lockdown, but this is the second one I personally have been to, the Retro Valley Game Swap. And I highly recommend, if you're in the area of Burbank, check out their Instagram page, Game Realms. They usually announce weeks in advance of when they're going to hold their game swap. But I definitely had a blast this time around because of quarantine and lockdown. I haven't been able to actually go out and hunting. I also stopped by a couple garage sales, but nothing too special. Not a lot of them actually had video games, and that's really a testament because people are wanting to hold on to their games now, which is awesome. And I can definitely see a lot of people really getting into the hobby for collecting's sake, and because they want to regain that childhood and play some of the games that they've remember from the past. So I really had a blast looking through some of the tables that these people had. Awesome games. This one guy had a complete in-box copy of Lunar Silver Star, which I was so tempted to buying, but there was smaller and cheaper games that I was actually looking for during that day. So let's take a look at some of the games that I managed to pick up at the swap and throughout the month. So starting off, I actually picked up a complete in-box Pokemon Mini. Actually, this little case for it was from Toys R Us. It was actually an eBay seller that had it for a pretty good price. The only issue with the one that I had picked up from him that came with the case and a few games was the left directional button and the down directional button weren't working. So I actually bought a couple more so I can scrap them for parts and make sure that this one works. It's such a fun device. It's got a gyro sensor. It's got vibration. It's actually a really cool little device to play on the go. And the games that I've been picking up with so obviously the pack-in title for Pokemon Mini that came with every console was Pokemon Party Mini. It's such a really cool game. It's a collection of, I think, 5 or 6 games, mini games, where you pretty much try to beat the high score. There's a punching one where you gotta shake the Pokemon Mini device, and when it vibrates, you stop shaking so that you can actually put up your. It's a Hitmonchan against a Machop, It's actually a pretty cool little mini game. Then there's like a soccer one where you're playing as a Chansey trying to keep the soccer ball in front of her. The other game that came with the eBay purchase was actually Pokemon Pinball, or Pokemon Mini Pinball, I think it was what it's called. It's not really a pinball game, it's more of like a plunger where as the levels progress, I think there's like 70 levels, which is impressive for a device of this size. As the game progresses, you continue to unlock different Pokemon which act as the plungers. And what's actually really cool is for the GameCube, Pokemon Channel actually contains all the American released Pokemon mini games. In the Pokemon Mini, it's probably the only way to be able to play the Pokemon mini games on your TV without actually like emulating it. But that's actually a pretty cool tidbit, and it's got an exclusive Snorlax game, or Munchlax game, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But really cool to have this in my collection, and I came up with this case because I've never seen this Wooper Blue case anywhere. I didn't even know it existed until I found the eBay listing. So yeah, pretty cool. Now the next thing that I picked up that was on my radar for such a long time, immediately when they announced it, was the Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword Joycons. Now when I saw that they had announced these, I was blown away. I absolutely love Skyward Sword. I was one of the few who actually really enjoyed the game when it came out. I remember people not really caring about it too much, saying it was very linear, which it's all true and very valid criticisms. But because I was enjoying so much Skyward Sword, when they announced the HD and the Joy-Cons, I had to have it. Sadly, I was too slow to actually be able to pre-order them. But as time went on, they were actually managing to get these into brick and mortar stores and are now widely available. I go into Target frequently and Best Buy pretty often, and I see them just hanging out. Like, they're just so common now. GameStop has them all in stock, which is pretty cool to say, and I'm really glad that these are more widely available because they are beautiful. The deep blue and the lighter blue of the Joy-Cons, I actually thought they were the same color Joy-Cons, but they're actually different color. One's like a purple and one's like a deeper blue. And the Joy-Con straps that come with it are actually modeled after Fi or Fi, her tights. They have like that blue spiral and the purple theming around it. They're beautiful Joy-Cons, and I'm really glad to have actually finally been able to find them and pick them up without having to pay exorbitant secondhand prices on the market. So really glad to have these, and these Joy-Cons are definitely going to be on my Switch for like time to come. So speaking of Skyward Sword, I actually managed to find myself a Zelda and Loftwing amiibo. It's a beautiful sculpt. I'm actually really happy to find it again. I think they're slowly starting to come back into GameStops. Amazon also has these for sale on the website. So when the Zelda and Loftwing amiibo and the Zelda Skyward Sword Joy-Cons were first announced, they were sold out and out of pre-orders immediately. But it's pretty cool to see that they're starting to slowly come back in, so they're more widely available for people who wish to have them. But yeah, really cool. Now the next game I picked up was really a game that was on my list for a long time, for a very long time, because as a huge fan of fighting games, I wanted to go back and play the Origins, especially with this character appearing on Street Fighter V, and that character is Akira. So I managed to pick myself up a copy of Rival Schools. This is such a cool 3D fighting game. All the combos, the aerial combos that you can do with your characters, the tag team attacks, super cool. The music is awesome. It's actually got a kind of interesting story. Now what's cool about Rival Schools on PS1 is that it comes with 2 discs. It comes with the arcade version, which is disc 1, and then it also comes with the Evolution disc. Now the reason why you would want to play the Evolution disc was because of the multiplayer, the wild 4-player using multi-tap abilities that you can do with 4 different people and playing at the same time was just super cool. On top of that, the music is really awesome, and just the art style is just very reminiscent, and the graphics of a time way back when fighting games were really like, you were into fighting games. So yeah, I added Rival Schools to my collection, which I'm really happy about, and that's definitely one game on my list that I've been looking for such a long time. So Rival Schools, super awesome. Now sticking with PlayStation, I actually have never really heard about this game. Maybe in passing or seeing other video game collection update videos. This game was never on my radar, but was a very impulse buy. and that game is Brigandine. Brigandine is a PS1 tactical role-playing RPG. Reminds me a lot of like Civ, the Civilization series, mixed with like Fire Emblem and Final Fantasy Tactics. A lot of high fantasy themes in it. You have human knights leading armies of like dragons and like different mythical creatures. It's got a really cool music, admittedly, and you see that? It's a game published by Atlas, so it's fairly rare and kind of hard to find and come across. What's really cool is the condition that I got this game at is awesome. It's a beautifully it's an amazing condition. It came with the instruction manual, and it also came with the map. I actually went out to buy a frame for the map because it's just such a nice looking like PS1 era map that not a lot of games back in those times really did. They wouldn't really give you a lot of extra stuff in jewel cases, but unlike in Brigandine where they went above and beyond, they included a map, and on the other side of the map is actually kind of like an evolution guide, which I said it kind of reminds me of Fire Emblem, where units would evolve and change their classes into higher level forms of that classes depending on what items you give them and how they level up. So Brigandine is definitely one of those games. It was an impulse buy. I didn't really know too much about it, but I'm really excited to start playing it, and I'll do probably a review on it just to like explain how my thoughts on it. But yeah, Brigandine, really excited to actually have this to my collection. It's definitely one of those display pieces that you can talk about because it's very not a lot of people really know about it. Now, I don't really care much for Xbox. I really don't. If you notice in any of my past videos, I rarely ever talk about Xbox. But these games were just so cheap that I had to pick them up. And they just bring back memories because at one point in time, my high school years, I did have an Xbox 360. I was the biggest role-playing game fan and disappointed that not too many RPGs came out for the Xbox 360. We got Final Fantasy 13, we got Star Ocean: The Last Hope, we got Blue Dragon, which is still an Xbox 360 exclusive, and we got Infinite Undiscovery, an Xbox 360 exclusive, which it is exclusive to this very day. They've never reprinted this game again on any other platform. And it's by Tri-Ace and published by Square Enix. So back in those days, high school days, anything Square Enix I would go out and buy religiously because I was a Square Enix fanboy. So my mind thinking that anything had that stamp of the Square Enix seal of approval, it had to be a good game. I vaguely remember picking this game up because it was cheap back then, and it's still pretty cheap now. It's from what I remember, it's an open world-ish kind of styled RPG. You run from city to city, dungeon to dungeon, with a party of different people and different characters that have abilities and weapons. I do remember loving the music. I do remember back in those days, I had my PSP. And I would burn music from YouTube, and I found the soundtrack for Infinite Undiscovery, and I had the soundtrack for Infinite Undiscovery burned onto my PSP on those little memory sticks that you had to have for the PSP. But yeah, so Infinite Undiscovery is one of those games that was always circling in the back of my head that I would never have picked up, solely because I don't have an Xbox 360 until today. My girlfriend's sister sold me her Xbox 360, which was literally sitting in their room for years. Since I started dating her, I noticed that it was there and was never used, collecting dust, and she sold it to me, Xbox 360, and she also sold me Alice Madness Returns. I actually heard really good stuff about this. There's actually some people in the community who have this game highly regarded. I've never played it, but it was one of those games that I've always wanted to when I did have the Xbox 360, but it was rated mature, so at that time I couldn't go out on my own to actually buy those games. But yeah, Alice Madness Returns, Infinite Undiscovery, and the new, an Xbox 360 first generation, which actually works, which is hard to find nowadays and surprising. Actually, people are actually looking for these games because they like modding it. However, I'm really excited to be able to play Infinite Undiscovery again. Definitely want to get Blue Dragon from Blue Dragon now, and The Last Remnant. I know The Last Remnant is on Switch and PC and now on PS4, but there's just something about playing Last Remnant, which is a game I did play back in the day. There's just something about playing those games on their original console which just, you know, you can't beat. Original hardware, you can never be beat. Now, the next game that I bought, actually from Game Tower, because I follow them on Instagram and they're always posting their inventory. And one of the games that I saw was Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Heroes on the Dreamcast. Now, this is the first Marvel vs. Capcom. I didn't grow up playing this one. I grew up playing this one. This is such a great game. The music, I remember going to my cousin's house because they had it on PS2. And not my favorite version. I believe the Dreamcast version is the superior version, but... So Marvel vs. Capcom 1 actually has a smaller roster than Marvel vs. Capcom 2. But there are so many assist characters, which is so freaking cool. This is definitely a game that I had to have just because I had the second one. I wanted to add it to my collection. Was not on the top of my list, but because I follow Game Tower on Instagram and they posted it, I figured why not just go out and get it and add it to my list. They actually had it for a pretty good deal, which I'm excited for. But give them a follow because they're always posting the inventory when they come in, and it is first come first serve. But you're able to message them directly to figure out prices and to see if it's worth the drive down. Yeah, Marvel vs. Capcom, really excited to have this in my collection. So something that I've been wanting to fix for a long time was my faulty RF connector for my TurboGrafx 16. It worked sometimes and sometimes it didn't. So for whatever reason, I would plug it into my TV where it has an RF adapter, an RF connector. And the power wouldn't come up. I mean, the game wouldn't display. My top-loading NES, which is an RF output device, works perfectly fine. But for some reason, it didn't want to work on the TurboGrafx 16, which is kind of bums me out that you know I don't have that functionality anymore. But because of technology, thanks to Hyperkin, we now have the AV adapter, and it's a really easy plug-and-play solution where you just pop in the device and be able to just convert your TurboGrafx 16 to composite, which is that yellow, white, red. Everybody knows what those connectors are. So now that I'm able to do that, I can finally play my Bomberman 93 again, and which is pretty much the only game I care to play. I mean, Keith Courage is cool. It's kind of goofy. It plays very like, eh. It's definitely not the game that you wanted to get on Christmas when your friends had Super Mario World or Sonic the Hedgehog and you got Keith Courage. Whatever, but Bomberman 93 is a great game, and now I can play it again. It works flawlessly. The image quality is really nice. But yeah, really glad to finally pick this up. It was fairly cheap, got it on Amazon, came the next day, and yeah. Now we finally get to the games where I actually picked up at the Retro Value Game Swap, which I was looking for this game for a long time, and I still didn't find it. But I found other games in the same series which I was excited to add to my collection. And that game is Kirbys Dreamland 2. I've never played that game and it's eluded me for such a long time. Loose, complete in box, I can never find that game. And years, I don't want to buy it on eBay because I don't want to buy it on eBay. I want to find that game out in the wild. So to compensate for that, two of the games that I ended up picking up are Kirbys Nightmare and Dreamland, which is an awesome Game Boy Advance game. In my opinion, one of the top 5, if not top 3 best Game Boy Advance games in the world, which is Kirbys Nightmare and Dreamland, which is a remake of the original Kirby's Adventure on NES. And the next game that I picked up in the same series is Kirbys Dreamland, the first one. Why not? It was a good deal, it was in really good condition, and I got it for pretty cheap actually. I personally feel like there's a misconception out there that Kirby's Adventure is the first game in the series, which actually Kirbys Dreamland on Game Boy was the first game in the series. That's why Kirby's white here, because there wasn't an established color for him until you pop the sucker into the Super Game Boy, which I love the Super Game Boy. It actually takes a lot of games and colorized them. There was actually a few games like Kirbys Dreamland, Wario Land, I believe, and a few others that actually took advantage and fully utilized the Super Game Boy, which it would give them custom borders, actually colorize the games. If you ever get a chance to play Kirbys Dreamland on the Super Game Boy, I highly recommend it because it's probably a superior way to play it. That's not to say that this isn't such a good handheld game, but it's better to play it on Super Nintendo in my opinion. Kirbys Dreamland. Now I need to find Kirbys Dreamland 2. Now the next game that I picked up at the Game Swap was the granddaddy of RPGs, Final Fantasy. How had I never had this in my collection? it was actually a pretty cool deal. I was able to get the guy down to $5 less than what he was asking, but the game and the condition was really good. I'm really excited to have this in my collection, and I've played every single Final Fantasy game. I actually beat Final Fantasy 1 on PSP years ago. This was back in my high school days, but I never played it on the NES. I've heard that the game is actually kind of tough in the NES because it's the NES. It was those days where you didn't have that hand holding, and you relied on Nintendo Power and other gaming magazines to kind of like give you the hints. But the reason why I picked up Final Fantasy on the NES is because it's iconic, and it's one of those games that I actually personally want to display because it represents my taste in video games and where that desire to play fantasy games came from was from Final Fantasy. And so because of that, I kind of wanted to add it to my collection as a tribute to my taste in video games. And that's all I got at the Game Swap. But the next game I want to talk about is a game that was actually on my radar for a really long time because of a different game in the same series. I picked up Solomon's Key, which is a really cool puzzler on the NES. You play as Dana. I believe he's a wizard, but you enter into a castle looking for Solomon's Key. And the way you do that is Dana has like a wand which either creates blocks or destroys blocks. And the way you complete levels is you either climb your way up by creating blocks to get a key and open a door, and you can also along the way collect different like power-ups, if I'm not mistaken. The reason why I wanted this game was because I had an itch to play puzzle games on the NES and to kind of have that feel of the old school 80s games, which Solomon's Key really personifies in my opinion. But the reason why I say that I was inspired to pick up this game was because I'm looking for Fire and Ice, which is actually the sequel to Solomon's Key. Fire and Ice is a fairly pricey game now, and back when I started researching more games to start collecting, Fire and Ice was kind of up there already. But it's the sequel to Solomon's Key, believe it or not. They just call it Fire and Ice. And so I wanted to start off with the first game, Solomon's Key. I highly recommend it because it's such a cool puzzle game. It's kind of cheap right now, and I would say this is a hidden game to add to any NES collection. And then the last game that I picked up, which was actually today, was Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. Now, I don't have a history with the Pokemon Coliseum series, which is XD is actually a sequel to Pokemon Coliseum on the GameCube. But I hear that Pokemon XD is the better version of the two, especially if you want to just jump in and play any of the games in the series, which I think there's only two, right? There's Coliseum and then Gale of Darkness. So this is the better version because they say that there's a lot of quality of life improvements, purifying shadow Pokemon, and on top of that, it's Pokemon. Like, as a huge Pokemon fan, like, why would I not have this in my collection? I don't think I'm going to be looking for Coliseum if this is the superior version of the two, but from reviews, I hear that this is the one that you want to play anyways. But yeah, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness with that Shadow Lugia, that really nice foil art is really cool. Glad to have this in my collection, complete in box. It's got a hefty manual, which I'm pretty impressed. But yeah, so those are the games and trinkets that I picked up within the last month and a half. I was really excited to be able to go to the meet, the Game Swap, because it was just nice to be in that general like vibe of video game collecting. I was hearing conversations of people like, man, I got this game for this deal, or I was finally able to complete this game, or get this game, or get this certain game added to my collection. It was really fun to go, and it was a breath of fresh air to actually be able to go out, spend a whole day just hunting for video games, and I'm definitely going to be doing that for years to come. So until next time, I'll see y'all later.